Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Murphy, and I'm Senior Vice President of Publisher and Buyer Development at OpenX. OpenX is the world's leading independent advertising exchange and supply side platform. And our session today is entitled How Merkle is Approaching Identity and Future-Proofing Their Approach to Digital. And with me today is Gerry Bavaro, Chief Strategy Officer at Mercury, Merkle's identity resolution platform. Welcome, Gerry. And to kick things off, why don't you tell us a bit more about your role with Mercury?
Sure. As Chief Strategy Officer of Mercury, which is Merkle's identity resolution platform, I lead the sales, the solutioning, and the operations business, as well as our publisher, AdTech and MarTech integration business, where we're doing integrations with platforms like OpenX to enable addressability and post third-party cookie, first-party identity enablement. I also am out there like today, speaking quite a bit about transformation to first-party identity.
Great. So you were on stage at Advertising Week last year discussing the topic of identity and audience-driven targeting. And as we both know, a lot has changed in the past 12 months. Google has announced the deprecation of the third-party cookie. Apple has announced the deprecation of IDFA sometime next year. And I am curious to know more about how these changes have altered your perspective on the topic of identity, and how has Mercury's strategy changed as a result?
So I think really three things, Brian, have happened since a year ago. Number one is the talk of how pervasive the death of third-party cookies and device identifiers like IDFA would be, have moved from marketers, publishers, technology platforms being in preparation mode to now it's real, right? And there's sizable investments, as you see, in identity resolution to shift to first-party identity, a durable, more sustainable model for identity across all of these different types of businesses we work with. So that's number one. I think it's not a wait and see anymore. OpenX and us doing an integration of our Mercury ID to enable more addressability across inventory. Integrations like Adobe with Adobe Experience Platform integrating Mercury Identity Resolution into what is now their new CDP platform. You'll read a lot more about that during Advertising Week this week. And also publishers thinking about the quality of their inventory and not wanting sort of a redo of programmatic 1.0. They're really thinking about the future, the next 5 to 10 years of how they can drive monetization and a better value exchange with visitors across inventory. I'd say number two is that what was previously very fragmented parts of organizations, media, CRM, and database marketing efforts, as well as analytics, have come together in organizations more than ever before. I think this has been obviously accelerated by COVID-19 because the direct-to-consumer movement is now something that existentially just needs to happen. So more CIOs, CMOs, CTOs, and CEOs are getting a room together and thinking about how they transform their technology stack and their business model. And I'd say that, number three is that most clients, again, want to be like the Netflix or the Amazon of their industry. And I think that's really important because they're getting away from thinking about just impressions and mass reach. And really, for years, the talk about a true identity, basis of consumers and customers is coming to light now. And they're looking at the Netflixes, the Amazons, the Ubers of the world, and they're saying, look, regardless of what industry we're in, we really need to move to better value exchange between the customer and our brand. So that's really exciting, I think.
Tell me more about what your clients think about the coming changes to audience targeting. Are they concerned? Are they excited? And do you think that marketers will rely more heavily on the walled gardens, or do they see opportunity across the open web?
So there's really like two categories of clients, and they have sort of a different view of what's happening with audience targeting and the roles that Google and Facebook play. So number one is clients that have a large universe of first party IDs already. So they're heavily entrenched in CRM for many years. This is financial services, retail, auto, for instance. They've never really liked traditional DMPs anyway. They have analytics groups that are using offline data in their large universe of CRM records to do advanced segmentation and modeling and predictive analysis work or predictive models of who customers are or could be, and they're heavying up on addressable targeting. They've been excited about the changes, sort of saying, hey, we've been doing direct marketing for many years off of our first party data and modeling work, and thankfully now, with the growth of person-based media ecosystems, whether that's an AT&T and Warner coming together, and over 100 million IDs in that world, addressable targeting capabilities, Verizon, AOL, Yahoo coming together, addressable world. They're excited. Now, the second category of clients is clients that don't have a large first-party universe, right? Could be a CPG, for instance, and they're heavily invested in Google and Facebook. They're really struggling right now because we're talking to them every day about their struggle with going potentially bigger with a Google and utilizing Google IDs and more investment in Google Media and platforms like Google Ads Data Hub, which is their analytics environment where IDs down at a more granular level can be used for things like attribution. Uh, and they're saying, look, we need some aggressive education about how to transform to a cookieless future and how we can build our stable and durable universe of first party IDs. So that's where Mercury identity resolution comes into play. And for those clients, although they're struggling, there's a lot of consulting work we're doing. There's a lot of cookieless future presentations that we're doing, and they're sort of getting their ducks in a row. I mentioned earlier, the CIO, the CTO, the CMO getting into a meeting together to talk about this. We're helping them do that. So, that's sort of like how they're thinking about the future. But one thing in common among all of them is that they know they need to shift away from traditional technologies like the classic DMP, that's a third-party cookie store, and the ways that they bought, scaled audience-based media and programmatic, for instance, Open Exchange off of third-party cookie-based segments. No one's debating that. So, again, that's what's exciting for us.
Great. You mentioned the Mercury ID. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. Obviously, that is at the core of the Merkle and Dentsu business. Can you tell us more about how the Mercury ID works? And can you also talk about uh, how you think marketers are looking at the need for either a single source identifier or other solutions that might be on the table going forward?
Yeah. So first on Mercury and production. Mercury, as Merkle's identity resolution platform, has four components, and for 30 years, Merkle in the business of CRM and building databases. There's over 150 databases managed by Merkle. Simply with Mercury, took the long-standing assets in identity, our reference base, the fact that we have a PII record, street address, phone number, multiple emails on 242 million adults in the United States. That PII record, that's all opt-in, that's permissible offline data that has built that reference base. Clients, that first component of identity for Mercury as a product is clients can license that as their graph, right? And this can be owned and controlled by them as a full universe of US population. Essentially, they get to treat the whole US population PII based as their CRM database. So imagine a CPG that says, yeah, we're very thin on customer records. We don't have a direct to consumer business. They license our ID, it becomes the master ID in the organization, and that becomes their what we call private graph. Now, that graph, though, takes into consideration the second component of Mercury, which is data. So Merkle, as a third-party offline data business for many, many years, supporting databases and direct mail and email, for instance, and personalization, licenses up to 10,000 plus attributes from third-party offline data sources, both proprietary, so data source is the name of Merkle's data product, but then we have specialty products like Merkle Life Events. It tells clients who consumers are having a baby, who just got married, who just moved. That gets appended to the master ID. So now you're not working in the third-party cookie world. Clients, publishers, ad tech platforms can have this basis of U.S. population, PII-based ID. It's persistent, and there's various attributes that can be used to build an audience as a list of individual consumers. You also can use that to obviously bring your CRM into, match it, model, and do direct kind of personalization and communications to your known customers if you're an organization that has CRM records, for instance. And then the third component is connections. And Brian, this is where the OpenX integration comes into play. Our integration that we're launching with Adobe Experience Platform, but we've built 35 plus direct premium publisher ID synchronization. So we enable addressability for publishers, and we deploy our first party cookie, which resolves to that Mercury person ID. So we're going to continue to grow the sort of post third party cookie world of connections, MarTech, ad tech, direct publishers as they're moving beyond the third party cookie. Fourth component of Mercury is what we call the Mercury Clean Room. And that's a privacy safe analytics environment. So if you can imagine the next 5 to 10 years of marketing, there needs to be a place where you can bring all your IDs, CRM, first party website visitors, based on a first party cookie resolved to that Mercury ID. You got to bring that all into an environment. And then the exhaust of the cross channel media marketing CRM, outbound email, direct mail, programmatic display, right? That all has to come back. So when we bring IDs back into that clean room, they get rekeyed to the Mercury ID. Analytics folks from Merkle on the client side, because we're seeing clients growing their central analytics groups, AI, ML-based modeling work, attribution work off of the Mercury ID gets done in that clean room environment. So those are the four components of the platform. It's very flexible for clients to license our ID, to append data attributes, and leverage our connections. So, that's what we're seeing sort of being accelerated now across the clients we work with. They're very interested in licensing the Mercury platform for those purposes.
Great. So let's talk a little bit more about the connection side of that conversation. As you know, and as you mentioned, OpenX's role here is to ensure that you've got a way to activate these audiences across the open web, and our partnerships with the world's premium publishers enables you to do that. But let's talk a little bit more about the future of that side of the conversation, specifically around emerging channels. What do you think the future holds as far as expanding your efforts in this area beyond just the web and digital display into mobile, CTV, television, and other emerging channels?
Yeah, so you asked in the previous question, Brian, about single source. So just this relates to that question of, are marketers and publishers going to strive for a single source, like an industry-wide kind of new currency? What does that look like? The answer is, whether it's emerging channels like TV, or it's programmatic display, or it's CRM, right? Personalization, customer experience. There's always been in every organization the desire to have like a system of record. On the media side, it's the ad server. As you know, Brian, the DMP kind of blew up years ago as that single source. Add the DMP tags to everything, but that's a third party cookie, right? So that's going away. But that I'd say that like in emerging channels, let's take TV for instance, the big challenge is fragmentation. So connected TV, you have SpotX, you have TiVo, you have Samsung, you have Roku, and then you have the content owners, right? The HBOs, the Turners, and they have their apps, and they all sell advertising. They all have a different basis of identity, and there is no currency. So number one, in emerging channels like TV, like there has to be consolidation. There has to be that challenge of fragmentation. It's really hard to buy across different inventory because it's all different systems. So That's number one. Number two is we have a challenge with linear TV as well. So you have all these tools like Viacom Vantage and NBC AdSmart, and they're the ability to bring data into the linear TV planning world. So, the upfronts, right? Like I want to know where my audience of customers, I want to bring my customers in, or I want to bring a prospect audience built off of offline data from a Mercury, let's say. I want to know if they watch at 8 p.m., watch this network, watch this program. It's really hard to do that too because each of the networks has their own platform. They have their own system. So this kind of goes round trip to the question of what that single source should be, right? And we firmly believe that, and we're seeing this with marketers and ad tech, martech platforms, right? They Marketers want to own identity. They don't want to rent it anymore from a Google and a Facebook. They're asking about how they can license our ID, have that first party basis of an engagement with a consumer be the currency. And then interoperability with these different platforms, like hoping that all the platforms will resolve to one currency, uh, it's going to take a long time. The other thing is like, you see this in the world of currencies or consortiums with programmatic, moving to an ID that can replace the third party cookie for programmatic. Clients are telling us they don't want it to be an opaque industry standard because that's almost like Google and Facebook owning the currency, right? So own identity, build your private ID graph, and then, it's hard work to deal with the different fragmentation, but at least you're standing on a firm ground of what identity is: offline PII based record, first party procured identity, and integrations or connections to the question here with many different ad tech platforms, martech platforms, direct publishers, TV planning systems, addressable and connected TV providers. So you got to look for identity resolution providers that have flexibility and scale among all connections, not just over indexed into one channel like programmatic display, which a lot of the identity resolution providers have going on. So we're about enterprise identity for the marketer, right?
Right.
Make sense?
It does, yeah. And you touched upon this a bit, but there's certainly some misconceptions around our industry, and it can sometimes be difficult for marketers to keep track of the ever-changing landscape of audience and
Yeah.
identity. Can you talk a little bit about what you think some of the largest misconceptions are in this topic today?
Yeah. I'd say I'd say the biggest misconception, and I've even talked about it here, which might kind of make people think that it's a challenge no matter what, is that you have to have a direct to consumer scaled business model like a Netflix, or you got to be the Dollar Shave Club, right? Direct to consumer, or many others that have cropped up as direct to consumer businesses, to take control and ownership and transparency, have transparency of identity. And that's simply not the case. It's the biggest misconception, because you'd be surprised, Brian, how many times we get into meetings with clients and they go, we have a really big loyalty and promotions program, but um, we don't really know much about that, and it's sort of off in a corner. And when we say, you do realize that you could be utilizing every interaction with a loyal customer with an outbound email, right, with a service contact, with a brick and mortar engagement where somebody has a coupon in hand, you can use that to create a first party ID, store that, and have that be the persistent ID that helps build your graph, right? And you own it, you control it. The other thing is media, right? When you run addressable media, there's an opportunity, if you use identity resolution, to have every click, every engagement across website page that you own, right? Your first party website, create identity as well, right? So this doesn't mean that you have to have a commerce model, for instance, that sells direct to every single customer or consumer in the United States. There are ways to do this, but it's a data management challenge. It's an education about what identity means, right? So I think that's a big misconception. We have marketing organizations that haven't really gotten into the rooms with CIOs, CTOs about data management and identity at the enterprise level. So I feel like we're helping clients with that, but we got like a 2 to 3 year roadmap to get that misconception out of the way.
Yep, great. Well, Gerry, thank you very much for a great conversation and for all your insights on this very important topic. Again, I'm Brian Murphy, Senior Vice President at OpenX, and my guest has been Gerry Bavaro, Chief Strategy Officer at Mercury. Thanks to all of you for watching, and for anyone who is watching live and has questions, please submit them in the comment section below. We'll be sure to answer them in a few minutes. Thanks, everybody.